Thank you for joining me for the latest episode of the Purple Team podcast. I'm Eliza-May Austin. I'm joined today by Liz Deakin, the CEO and founder of Lithify. We are going to be talking about ICS, SCADA, OT environment security. Today we're going to be talking about OT and purple teaming in an OT environment, so ICS, SCADA, those kind of environments. We've got Liz Deakin here of Lithify, and she's going to be giving us some information on how testing and how security is implemented in these kinds of environments. So Liz, do you want to introduce yourself just so that I don't miss anything out?
Absolutely, and thank you very much for having me on. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. It's a great topic and it's something that we're very passionate about. So I'm really, really pleased that we've got this opportunity. So thank you for that. My name's Liz Deakin. I'm the founder and CEO of Lithify, which is an IT security specialist reseller. And we very much have a specialism in OT and SCADA environments. So we spend a lot of our time helping OT customers, it's essential infrastructure, to really get the most from their equipment and to be as secure as they possibly can be, through just really giving them a really solid platform and a basis for everything that they want to do. We spend a lot of time on strategy, a lot of time on thought leadership and helping organizations to see the far horizon, which of course plays totally into purple teaming, doesn't it? That's something we've been doing for many years. So really, we're helping people to get every shred of value out of their investment that they've made in security and to keep them as safe as possible.
So in terms of like operational technology environments and IT environments, and we'll go into OT IT convergence a bit later, what I just want to hit on as a topic is how different the priorities are in those environments. So in an OT environment, really the top priority is keeping things operational, keeping business going. In an IT environment, the key topic of concern very much depends on the environment. So how do you conduct a penetration test in an environment that's incredibly sensitive? It may have various different machines that are various different ages and sensitivities. And also there's no downtime allowed. So you couldn't just scan something and then accidentally knock it off, because you'd potentially be losing millions of pounds depending on what that company is producing, if it's manufacturing, all these different kinds of things. How would you penetration test in an environment that's as sensitive as that?
You're absolutely right. And it is a very different environment. You're quite right that everything done in OT is around keeping those lights on, keeping the systems running, and continuity is the watchword. Rather than in IT, in the mainstream, where we really want to prioritize updates, patching, latest functions, user convenience, evolving IT technology. So it's chalk and cheese between the two, because actually, when you think about evolution and latest functions, OT will very often say to you, no, we don't want that. What we want is just keep everything as it is. Let's just keep the lights on. So that's very, very important. And you're quite right. It's not possible to pen test in the same way in OT. For some of the reasons that you've just discussed, it's not easy to have consultants wandering around a secure site, which is producing electricity or as a utility or as a hospital. So that's not easy. And then, of course, quite often we're dealing with PLCs and controllers, which are based on proprietary technologies. So we're not talking about the same functions as we would find in an ordinary commercial network. And sometimes it is very, very possible, as you've already mentioned, for scanners to knock over PLCs, normally because they can be very small, they're based on old technology, so they don't have very much buffer. And if something like a Nessa scanner just starts hammering them for no good reason as far as they're concerned, they're not expected, it will crash. And in the event that it crashes, we've seen a whole site go down, and we've seen it more often than we would like. Basically, those systems have a fail-safe in them, which is there to protect the people who live around those plants and who work in the plants. And obviously, that's everybody's number one priority. But essentially, if we were to knock over those controllers, if the turbine controllers then don't see a response from their systems for 9 or 10 seconds, they will shut everything down. And once shut down, it is not a quick thing to reboot a power station. We could be talking a week or more of downtime. So you're quite right, running scanners, trying to implement new and interesting attacks is not something that's terribly comfortable. We understand the benefit of it, but it's just not something that can necessarily be attained in the same way. We can't entertain it in that way. Yeah. So we need to try different tack, don't we? And really, the very first thing is we don't start with pen testing. We have to think about it in very, very different terms. So pen testing can be a quick fix. Sometimes it can give you a real snapshot of what's happening. But it can also be identifying a whole lot of things that are actually noise, because the teams on site are already aware of, yes, okay, we should have patched that system, and we know about that vulnerability and so on. So it could throw up a whole bunch of things which on the face of it seem critical, but if it's really critical, but on a non-critical system that's not connected to the outside world, actually the team on site might be saying, actually, that's not as critical as it might appear. We're in a commercial system. It can also be a little bit counterproductive in the sense of if you start pointing out to the OT team that actually there's things they should be aware of, and they're like, yeah, okay, we already know all of that, then sometimes that can cloud the issue. So really what we do instead is to talk about zero touch, first of all, and to start with a review. So everything we have to do in OT must be zero touch, because there can be no risk that anything we do in terms of audits, pen testing, evaluations can do anything to derail that continuity and that uptime. So we need to be very, very sensitive to that. So that's the first thing. So we'll start by looking at a review of everything that's going on that site. And really in terms of systems, we're looking at how things fit together. Is the zoning in place? Is the network segmented properly? How does information get in? How does information get out? For us, we tend to lean quite heavily on the Purdue model to allow us to identify which layer of security we're looking at and to ensure that the things residing in those layers are correct. And really, we're looking to find out what's the most important stuff on your network, what's the least secure stuff on the network, and let's face it, we're really hoping that the two aren't the same thing, because that can be a bit scary. And then we're looking at access. Quite often, various vendors and manufacturers are not segmented from one another. So, for example, we wouldn't want GE engineers being able to see Honeywell systems or Emerson systems and so on. So it's very much about segmenting manufacturers, segmenting user groups, and really demarking access based on role. So really, from that, you can imagine we review, we discover what the problems are, then we can remediate, and then we start to test. And at that point, then testing becomes very key, because then it tells us all the stuff that we don't know. And that is really, really good. And of course, at that point, then we start to report. And then actually in OT, our favorite approach is just to say, this is not a one-time thing. This is repeat, repeat, repeat. It's a merry-go-round that goes around monthly. So it's review, test, report, review, remediate, test, report, and on, and it's got to be zero touch. So you can imagine that if we're talking about zero touch, and I'm saying that things like Nessus scanners are just not helpful, then how do we do that? Well, first of all, we have to look at how we fit everything together, and we have to look at what's there. So first of all, we have to build asset management systems, and it might be in the olden days that we would manually feed into the data into the system. And actually, in some sites, we still do that. That can be the best way of doing it. But these days, of course, we've got other options. There's lots of software out there that can help with passive scanning and asset discovery. Skybox, for example, is one that would do that, but there are others. And we look at all packets available. we then want to get a list of all the devices that are legitimate and they're on a system. And again, you know, we can start to do that by finding everything on a span or a mirror port and look at the IP or MAC addresses. Sometimes maybe you get the host names as well, but if not, then you can interrogate those afterwards. And really look to build a proper topology of everything which is there and actually touch it and make sure that everything is legitimate. And once you've done that, once you have a complete list of everything that should reside on that system, then you can say, right, okay, this is day 0. Anything new could potentially be rogue, and we'll class it as rogue until we discover that, yes, okay, that's a new laptop, that's a new system that's gone in and everybody's happy with it. So that's really, really useful in giving everybody a benchmark and a starting point for where are they at, what's supposed to be there, and so on. Nowadays, we can now feed into intelligence engines as well. So AAD has become a big watchword in OT, and there's a number of, AAD stands for Asset Anomaly Detection. So actually, these are systems which overlay PLCs and controllers and are looking to be able to give visibility to those systems, which ordinarily hasn't been there up to this point. And again, there's a bunch of these around at the moment, Clarity, CyberX, SCADA Fence, and a bunch more. IBM also do it as well. And really, they're then starting to, you know, build a picture for us of everything that's there. So really, rather than pen testing, where we would ordinarily say, right, okay, then red team, off you go, try everything you can think of to break into this site, to break into that system, and see what you can do to expose those flaws. We have to be a little more careful, and we have to think about it a little bit more strategically to say, okay, let's work together a little more and really do something that's a bit more holistic and also minimizes the risk to the site.
So thank you. I love listening to that, actually. Fantastic. I've learned loads already. So is sort of threat modeling a key aspect of this then?
Absolutely. Yes, yeah. Absolutely. And when we talk about zero trust, it's never more applicable than it is in OT. We essentially, and you do get that feeding back to you to say, well, don't you trust us? You know, we've all been, we've all been assessed, we've all been interrogated, we're all safe people, but we have to start from zero trust for sure.
Okay, cool. So where do you think OT security rather is going to be in 2 to 3 years' time? I'm just interested in where you think it's going to be, where you think it might be if it's not taken seriously, and just give me your predictions.
So I think it is being there is a sea change going on. I mean, they've made huge strides actually in OT in the last 5 years. If we were to go back 5 years, there were still people saying, why would anybody want to hack a power station? Surely you can't get any data off this MRI scanner. Why would anybody want to hack an overhead motorway gantry? And definitely some of that still prevails, but thankfully it's getting less and less. So really what we're looking at is building on the progress that's been made, really to understand that whilst data can be really unimportant in OT, because actually the data can be out of date 5 minutes after it's produced, the systems are always critical. And that's a really big distinction to make. So we're really seeing a sea change in how important people are thinking about security. They really are thinking, this is really important, this is something I have to do. And I would like to see in 2, 3, 5 years' time a building block to say everybody understands that OT security is critical and it must be robust and it must be optimized. And I would love to see that coming from the top down, to say security is really, really important. What we're finding right now is that quite often in a large organization, it can be piecemeal. So you go and visit one site and they see security as being very important. They perhaps got an IT manager, an IT director on that site who's really, really on the ball and they're really across it and they understand it and they get it. but you could go to a sister site down the road and find that actually that's not the case, and perhaps they're still thinking about it in engineering terms and so on. So I would really love to see across the board everybody understanding how security is. I think the other thing that we've got to face up to actually is that over the next 3 to 5 years, probably, we're going to see even more state actor intervention, and that is really quite frightening. So obviously that's hacking on a whole different scale with far more resources, and for reasons other than just money, which a lot of hacking comes down to, can I get some bitcoins out of somebody and can I make myself rich? Actually, if you think of the implications of state actors, money is probably not their primary concern. Disruption to systems, services, a whole state nation could be their concern. And that's really worrying for us. So really, if I were to give you my wishes, if you like, I would really like to see the widespread adoption of systems like AAD so that we've got better visibility. I'd love to see widespread adoption of that kind of holistic purple teaming that we've just talked about around a cyclical review, remediate, test, and move forward, and really have a sort of a merry-go-round that's evolving all the time and is aware of the far horizon, which isn't always the case. I'd also in OT like to see the eradication of multi-homing, which has always been a big problem for us, because we know that people say, oh, OT, it's dead easy because it's all air gapped. And actually, we know, because we've proved it on many sites, that actually that is not the case. And whilst a computer might be multi-homed and on the face of it can't transmit packets, it doesn't take anybody with a modicum of skills any time at all to be able to breach that. So there's a lot of stuff which we can work on, but we are starting to see a change for sure.
Importance and seriousness in a lot of places, because I think an oil refinery or an oil rig is in effect a weapon of mass destruction. It just isn't being used as one. And if it were to be used as one, it could blow out half the country and take thousands of or more people with it. Or if too much chlorine was pumped into our drinking water, people could get seriously ill. There's all these different things that my head goes off on, like these tangents when it comes to this. What are the specific pain points in OT environments that are hindering the security, that's stopping these IT managers and information security managers from really getting a grasp on security?
Yeah, you make a big point about being scared, and maybe we can come back to that in a bit. But the biggest pain point always in OT is that actually even now OT is not designed with security in mind. Even systems which are being put live right now might have been designed 20 years ago. Well, of course, everybody's approach to security then was very different to how it is now. So we're talking about old technology, we're talking about traditional ways of doing things, and actually to this point, there's been a real prevalence of that flawed methodology that I just mentioned, air gapping that doesn't work, multi-home machines which are easily compromised. Really, that's where we're starting from. We're starting from a really low base. So, that doesn't help matters at all. And then you overlay that to say, well, that's fine. Let's just march in there tomorrow and let's just do loads of patching and let's make loads of changes. Well, of course, in OT, you can't do that, can you? You can't just patch and have the possibility that you could pull the site down. We've got sites where perhaps they only have a site-wide planned outage once every 3 to 5 years. So you can't just march in and maybe take it down on a whim, because you're affecting national systems and the way that we all live our lives. It's just not possible. So all of those things really make it far more challenging in OT than perhaps it might be in a commercial system.
Go on, you wanted to come back to when I said I think the whole lack of security awareness in OT is quite scary. You wanted to come back to that?
Only because you're absolutely right when you say, what are the implications of an attack on critical national infrastructure? And if you start to think about it too hard, it'll keep you awake at night, because it really is quite, quite phenomenal. We've all seen with the recent lockdown that we've all experienced just how quickly life changes. And that's really been thrown into sharp relief for everybody in 2020 in a way that I think if you were to ask us in 2019, nobody was anticipating the kind of changes that we've all made. Let's face it, we're in August right now. You and I might be having a very different conversation this time last year about where are you going on your holidays. You might decide on a whim to just nip out for a city break for a long weekend. You could just nip to Tesco's. You don't need to think about having a mask. You don't need to think about sanitizing your hands in the same way, although obviously one would hope that we were all doing a modicum of hygiene. But we've had tremendous differences in the way that the world works, the whole shift to working from home, the fact that schools haven't been able to operate, the fact that hospitals have really had to revolutionize the way that they've been working. That's all been a huge change, which has been caused by a pandemic, not due to any attack. So if you start to think about that, then think about what happens in the event that hospitals get shut down because some of their OT equipment, things like MRI scanners and operating theatres and so on, which operating theatres rely very, very heavily now on things like laser technology and so on. What happens if they get shut down? Perhaps there's people there who are going to be very ill indeed because they didn't get the operation that they needed, or it wasn't possible to see their x-rays in a timely fashion. You've already mentioned water. What happens all of a sudden? We're very, very privileged in this country to have all grown up with drinking water that's safe from the tap. You don't have to think about boiling it or taking any other steps. That's not the case everywhere in the world, as we all know. But what would happen if tomorrow all of a sudden we found that I'm starting to get ill or worse from contaminated drinking water because, as you mentioned, somebody had played with the levels and so on? It's the same with things like the railway network and even stupid things like traffic lights and so on. What if somebody starts playing with those? What are the implications there? And then when you start to think about power stations and so on, you're quite right. What happens if somebody is able to take control of a turbine and perhaps change the mix of fuel and water that's going into that? That could have really devastating consequences. Solution, which is that you do interrupt those controllers and therefore the safety mechanisms just shut them down. Well, it doesn't take many power stations to be shut down at a single time for us to then start having blackouts across the country. We had one this time, I think a year ago, in the London area, and it went up as far as Peterborough. Because we had a set of circumstances, and I think it was just a poor coincidence, actually, where a gas-fired power station went offline at the same time as a wind farm was shut off because it had gone from glorious sunshine to being really windy weather. And as you know, sometimes in really windy weather, it's strange, but wind farms can't operate, and that had been shut down for its own protection. So again, it doesn't take very much for us to start to see life disrupted. And that really is very frightening. If we were to think of a couple of attacks going on at the same time, perhaps across different areas of OT, then you can see how bad that might be. What happens if they start to interfere with what goes into baked bean cans and half the population gets sick as a result of that? There's just a myriad of different ways that this could hit us. And it's really not, it's not beyond the realms of possibility that it's life-changing.
I think something that's quite concerning is that it might take something catastrophic for regulation to be put in place and followed properly and for security to be taken seriously. I don't want that to happen, but I fear that something is going to happen that is going to, like, can you just imagine if like the sewage works got shut down and then all crap was coming up through like the pavements and everything? Like, there's so many things that you could do, and if you did 2 or 3 in succession of one another as a orchestrated attack, you could absolutely shut a country down and bring it to its knees. And these are the weapons of war that we need to be concerning ourselves with, in my opinion. Not
You're absolutely right.
Necessarily rockets. Those as well, but
absolutely right. The consequences are unthinkable, and I agree with you. I think we are at war. I think we don't necessarily realise it. The consequences are extremely serious. If I was planning World War III, which I can assure you would be the last thing that I would want, I don't think you'd need a gun or a nuclear missile even. you can do more damage these days from a laptop and a mouse than you could ever do with nuclear missiles and so on. Checkpoint at the moment are predicting a cyber pandemic. If you read some of their blogs, they're saying we've just had a human pandemic. Don't be surprised if there's a cyber pandemic around the corner. They've just found a huge vulnerability. They're calling it SIG-RED, and I believe that Microsoft are taking that very seriously indeed. But they're saying that is wormable, and potentially people are open to attack if they haven't put their latest patches on.
Wow.
It's really quite concerning if you were able to, this is just one example, by the way, and it's just this week's example, really, but exploit a flaw on a domain controller. Well, they've always been seen as being pretty safe, actually, and yet now here we find that wasn't the case at all. I believe this vulnerability is 17 years old. So it's got the potential to be the next WannaCry. But it could be far more widespread. Who knows? It's really quite scary, isn't it?
So in terms of IT security, from a company perspective, a lot of the time it's seen as a tick box exercise. So, we've all heard that before. Absolutely. It's a standard that they have to comply with. It's something that they have to get ticked off in order to, get funding, get a client, or just to remain legal. Is it the same attitude in operational technology? Are they any different? Are they more, I fear you're going to say no, that they're not at the forefront of security, but how do they view it? Do they view it as a tick box exercise as well?
Unfortunately, in some quarters, yes, they do. But why are you not surprised to hear me say that? It's very tricky, isn't it? Because we've all seen that happen. I've got to say, we work with some individuals and some organizations who take this stuff extremely seriously, and they're really trying their level best. But as with all humans, we get a range of views, don't we? And for some people, they're just not taking it seriously at all. And they are seeing things like NISD as a standard where they literally just go down the list and they tick the boxes. In some cases, we've even heard it said, why should we bother? Should we not just stick a ton of cash aside and just pay the fine? And that's terrifying, because it's not just a monetary thing, is it? This isn't just people pushing paper around to make a bit more cash. This is things that affect our very way of life. And that is incredibly difficult. I think it's difficult for people. It's made worse by the fact that there's a myriad of standards and different regulations. I've just mentioned NISD, which has really tried hard to kind of standardize things in the UK. And there's other similar standards around the world, like NIST in the USA, for example. In fact, we've been working with a research group at Cambridge University recently, and they're really focused on understanding what people actually know and what they feel is important to adhere to. So there are a whole range of standards. So which ones are they looking at? Which ones are they taking seriously? Which ones do they think apply to them? And how far have they taken them up? Because it's one thing knowing about NISD, but if you haven't done anything about it yet, that's quite a problem, isn't it? It's quite tricky. I should say, by the way, NISD has been a really good start, but by definition, it was set up as a guideline because they didn't want to be too prescriptive, and therefore find that it wasn't ever going to be implementable by certain areas in essential infrastructure. So they've made it a guideline and a sort of a template, if you like. But because it wasn't a mandate to say you must do this and you must do that and you must implement XXX controls, it leads to confusion, doesn't it? So everybody's interpreting it in their own way. But there are some very, very diligent organizations out there. Sometimes in some organizations, I can think of one or two people that we absolutely love, and we can see them in their organizations really valiantly flying the flag to get things done, and perhaps some of the upper echelons not understanding. In some of OT, it's made worse, of course, by the fact that typically OT is not run by people who've come up through an IT route. So they might be far happier with a hard hat and an orange jacket on rather than actually sitting behind a screen. So, you know, it can be tricky because somebody from that background has potentially got a bit of a longer learning curve, perhaps, than somebody from an IT background. It's a lot to take on, it's a lot to understand, and it's a lot to implement when you've got lots and lots of other concerns and things on your plate.
I hope I'm not breathing too loud, by the way.
No, you're fine.
Oh my God, I just don't, in the background, like Hannibal Lecter, like.
You're rubbing your knees at the same time.
I'm so excited by OT. No, I had a pork pie before we got on this call, and it's like, give me indigestion. I don't know why.
Oh, no.
It's not going to stop me eating them. So I just want to go into like more of the Purple Team operation side of it in OT environments, although I'm guessing that's very hard. And again, it would be very much like a tabletop exercise from a threat modeling perspective, which is super interesting in and of itself. But good visibility is key to functional cyber defense. So you can't defend what you can't see.
Yeah.
And also that really applies to Purple Teaming, because your defense side has to be able to see what the red side are doing. So what unique challenges does the OT environment face when it comes to visibility?
So think about PLCs and controllers. This is really, really fundamental, and it's a really short answer in many ways. Think about proprietary systems. These are not things that are made by Microsoft or IBM or the names that you and I have known for all of our careers. These are things made by proprietary vendors, and they are concerned with the task at hand, whether that's controlling a turbine in a power station, or whether it's controlling the flow of information to and from an MRI scanner, or whatever it may be. So they're proprietary systems. They're based on their own protocols, and as a result they don't necessarily conform to the things that we would normally see on a Cisco network, for example. So it does make visibility really, really difficult, and that's really where these asset anomaly detection systems really come into play, because they can overlay and start to give us that missing visibility. You will have seen it, I'm sure, with your background. You see it in SIM, where essentially those devices just can't be interrogated in the same way. So really we're looking to overlay AAD to be able to bridge that gap, if you like. And you're quite right. You know, how do you don't know what you don't know, do you? On the basis that if you can't see something, how do you know whether it's doing a good or a bad job, or whether it's feeling healthy or not, and therefore whether you're going to have a problem or not? In terms of that, AAD definitely is a massive help, and those programs are coming along tremendously at the moment. The other thing is rogue device detection is really not widely adopted, and it should be, because we really need to see granularly what's going on those networks and every single device. So when you think about rubber duckies and things like that, we absolutely need to be able to see all of those things. The other thing, if you think about information flow to and from, that can be quite difficult as well. So, you know, we really need to control that. We could have systems and PLCs where they need updates, but they can only be done. We've in fact got one site where they are still doing updates via floppy disk, because it's the only method open to them. And
wow,
I know they had to go on a spending spree about 12 months ago to go and buy up lots and lots of floppy disks, because they just weren't being manufactured anymore, and they knew they were going to need them. But you know, that's an extreme example, but it could easily be an update that's only provided by a CD-ROM or via a USB stick. Well, in an ordinary office environment, we would just close down all those ports and say, no, you can't just shove a USB stick into the side of my machine. Thank you very much. I don't know where it's been. So again, the kind of sanitization zones, and we work personally with an organization called OpSWAP for a product called MetaDefender, which actually has a sanitization station, which enables people to be able to be sure that the media that's coming into their site is actually clean. Because we've seen that before. You might have a consultant who's essentially on a world tour, if you like, of Emerson sites, and he's going from one site to another, and he's plugging his laptop in, and he's doing the updates that he needs to do, or she. But because by definition of the fact he's going from site to site and he's connecting to lots of different systems, what is he picking up along the way? We don't know. And nobody can trust that that laptop, when it comes onto site, is clean. We must take steps to ensure that that's the case before we let them on.
We've established then that although there's some really good eggs, as a whole, the OT industry doesn't take security too seriously. Should we be scared as residents of a country that depends on OT?
It scares me a bit.
Yeah. No, you're not supposed to say that. It's freaking me out. No, I'm joking.
Look, let me put it to you another way. I was talking to somebody recently, and they said, you do realize, Liz, that actually my entire security budget is a subset of my maintenance budget, the maintenance budget for the whole site. Well, that means that if, for example, a major component in this operation goes wrong, that could be hundreds of thousands of pounds to put right, and that might wipe out my budget for that year. Well, how bonkers is that? I mean, that's absolutely crazy when you think of the fact that an outage of one day in an average power station is about £500,000. And if you can't restart the site for a week or more, then it doesn't take a genius to understand that that's an awful lot of cash. And for a fraction of that, we could really start to make massive changes. I should say that actually, if you were to consider health and safety, generally speaking, in these locations, any OT site you go to has huge health and safety. I've never been to a site in a utility where I didn't have to walk into reception and then go and sit in a little room by the side of reception where I watch a video or another kind of presentation that takes me through all of their safety procedures and the rules I must follow, where I can walk, where I can't walk, what I can do, what I can't do, what PPE I should be wearing at all times. And we have those regulations for very, very good reasons. We're very fortunate in the UK that these systems are very, very well developed. Really, I think when we start talking about IT security, we need that same kind of methodology to be applied and that same mindset to be applied in the same way, because actually the consequences are unthinkable if something were to go wrong. So I would like to see that taken into account more. I've got to say, it does scare me. And the reason why it scares me is that my team is the first defense for a lot of these organizations, and we're helping very diligent organizations to really be as secure as possible. And we're confident of the sites that we touch, and we are, I hope you can tell, we're incredibly passionate about what we do. Yeah. And we absolutely want the best for these organizations for sure, but we don't deal with them all, and there is an awful lot more to be done. So, you know, it is a concern for sure. It is not necessarily a comfortable position to be in at the moment. Has enough been done? Not yet.
So Lithify are known for taking on the difficult work. What do you mean by that?
It's one of those funny things, isn't it, that you start out in life and you think, oh, we'll just do some nice things and we'll do some good projects and we really, really want to do a good job. And then it becomes apparent that you do a good job and perhaps you think about things in a little bit of a different way. And so really our vendors then started to say to us, right, we've got this problem. It's really, really thorny. Nobody else has been able to fix it. We think you guys should have a go at fixing it. And we did, and we have. We've built a track record in that. So when I say we take on the difficult work, normally we end up taking on the stuff that nobody else wants to do. And that could be because the stakes are too high, or because the requirement is too difficult, or because it's bleeding edge. We do a lot of work with technologies and security requirements for applications and processes that are only just being developed. So it is high risk because we're kind of having to make our own map, if you like, rather than treading a well-defined path. So almost everything we do is incredibly complex. I think probably the simplest things that we're doing now were the most complex 5 years ago, and that journey just keeps on continuing. It's a real roller coaster. We tend to work in the least hospitable environment, so you can imagine that some OT sites are not comfortable in many ways. We don't just work in the UK, we work as far afield as the Middle East as well. And you can imagine being in a tiny hut in the middle of the sand in the desert in the Middle East can be quite good fun. So it's a really nice place to be. The other thing we say by difficult work is that we end up fixing the broken stuff. And we've done quite a number of these engagements where perhaps something's gone wrong, somebody's not happy with the investment that they've made, or just it seems that nothing is going to fix it. And we end up being the ones who do go in and we do fix it. And that comes back to that review and planning that we do right at the very beginning, because it means that we turn over every stone and have a damn good look underneath it. And we take the time to do that. which not everybody has got the time to do. So really, it's about having a team, I guess, who are all just super boffins that I'm totally in awe of, and I'm so lucky to work with them, and I thank my lucky stars every day. So that makes life easier, but also they are all the kind of people who really, really love a challenge, and not everybody's happy with that, because you're putting your neck on the block, aren't you? You're not just doing something that you've done 1,000 times and you know for a fact it's going to work. You're sticking your neck out and going, this is really broken. Nobody else has been able to fix it. I'm going to look a Herbert if I don't, but yeah, come on, bring it on. I really want to do it. One of our guys in particular is just bonkers like that. I ring him up and I say, hey, listen, I've got something really, really difficult for you, and it's really urgent, and it's a real problem. And he's like, yeah, come on, that's what I like the best. And that's a wonderful position to be in, because, of course, it just gives us so much confidence going into these sites. We really love it, and we're really passionate about what we do.
Oh, I love that you said we'd look a right Herbert. I've not heard that before, but I'm gonna use that. Hopefully not in front of anyone called Herbert.
Yeah, that would be the slight limitation of it, wouldn't it? If you met somebody called Herbert, it would be bad. I don't know anybody called Herbert.
You're a right Herbert. So I know in a previous conversation we were discussing this, and you said something really interesting, that a security assessment of an OT site has to involve all of the on-prem security stuff, literally from like the building, where the building is, all the way down to the PLCs, etc. Tell me more about this, because I think it's a really important message to get out there, because we're too often segregated from physical security, which there is reason for that, but also it does tie in a lot of ways. So I'm just really interested to get your thoughts on that.
Sure. Well, it started off from compliance, really. We had organisations saying to us, I've been told that from a compliance perspective, I need to audit everything that we do. And when we talk about security audits or security evaluations, we are absolutely not talking about putting an appliance on the network for 2 weeks and then generating a 2-page report at the end. This is a whole different level. And you're quite right. We literally start at the gates, and we look at every single turnstile, every gate, every access route into that system. It could also include internal door controls. It's that level. And then from there, we build up to the stuff where we really help. So every VLAN, every Wi-Fi network, what third-party access is there? And typically in OT, there will be multiple third parties who need both remote and on-site access as well. We then get into every system, and we'll turn over every stone. So, for example, we won't be happy to hear, yes, okay, I've got this server and it's part of a pair, and the other pair is in the other building on this campus. We'll actually want to walk over to the other building and go and look at said machine, which is the other half of the pair, to check it's still there. There was one notable occasion where we did that, and it was it's probably only about 6 or 7 years ago, but it was back in the day when we were changing somebody over, and they had Exchange on their site. And they said, oh, yeah, we've got 2 Exchange servers, it's all fine. It's like, okay, good. So I can see this one here. Where's the other one? And they went, oh, well, it's in a hut on the other side of the campus. It's about 4 miles away, and you don't want to go there. And the team said, yeah, we do. No, we do. We really do. And so it's, well, we'll have to get in a truck and we'll have to do that. Yeah, that's fine. Let's do it. So off they went across the campus. And they found said little hut, which was hilarious, because clearly nobody had visited for quite some considerable time, because the roof had fallen in, and it turned out that the floor was hollow. So all of the servers and so on had dropped through to the cellar. And clearly this thing was lying there. And indeed, we did see it, but it wasn't doing very much. Well, of course, that was a huge risk. Everybody on that site had been happily beavering away in the knowledge that it wouldn't matter if this server falls over, because the other half of the pair will just pick up where it left off and go. But it hadn't been in place for quite some considerable time. So we literally do go and find these things and, give them a little tap on the head and make sure they're all fine and that. It's the same with applications and so on as well. So we don't just say, and again, riffing on that same model, you might have Exchange and you might have had something like Mail Marshal set up on it. So have you got security for email? Yeah, we've got Mail Marshal. Oh, okay, great. Well, no, that's not right though, is it? Because actually Mail Marshal could just be sitting there letting everything through, so it's no security at all. We want to go in and actually have a look. What is it stopping? What is it doing? You know, how secure is that system? So an average report for us when we write one tends to be 100 pages plus, and it will list everything out, both for the OT side of the operation, but it will also list out all the commercial systems as well. It will identify all of the threats and map them against each environment, map them against the Purdue model. And basically then from that, you can imagine it's a very long report. It gets very techy in places, as you can imagine. So we then split it out at the end, and we have a glossary that literally lists all the red and amber actions. And it also then gives all the recommendations for the future, because there's always some, you know, you can imagine nobody is perfect. There is always something further that could be done. And you know what? I love doing these, not least because it gives people a really fulsome account of what is going on and the entire security posture. But you know what? It is lovely to go back and sometimes see the work that the on-site team have done since our last visit. The last one I did, I went to a couple of months after we produced the report. I went to see just to site just for a catch up, just to see how everybody was getting along. And they sat me in this boardroom and they said, "Did you bring a copy of the report?" And I'm like, "Well, it's on my laptop." And they said, No, don't worry. He said, let me give you our copy." So brilliant. Okay, fine. So out came this thing, which, do you remember the old machines where you used to be able to put your pages in and it would punch the holes and stick a binder around it? So they'd had these things printed out and bound. And then as we turned the pages through, it was all annotated and scribbled on, and post-it notes all over the place and all the rest of it. And you know what? It was lovely because it was evident that that was a living document, and the team had been going through going, right, okay, I've done that one. And you could see they'd crossed through the ones that they'd done, and they were highlighting, this one's the next thing on my list, that one's the next thing on so-and-so's list. And they were literally going through it. And you know what? That was brilliant, because it was obviously doing a really good job for them. It had given them the tools that they needed to be able to say, right, let's really get this thing by the scruff of the neck and let's make a difference here. And they were doing it. And I absolutely love doing that kind of work. It's just so positive. And of course, from there, obviously, we do that snapshot. We've made the recommendations. And then, of course, it's about iterations on that, isn't it, moving forward? It's not a point in time and that's done. You tick the boxes and you're off. It's literally a question of using that as your starting point and then building from there. And it's incredibly worthwhile. It's a real great exercise to undertake.
So where did the name Lithify come from? It's an odd one.
Yes, it is. And actually, the first time you hear it, you kind of fall over it a bit and you think it's all a bit, you know, weird in the middle and all the rest of it. And what on earth does that mean? But then all of a sudden people get it. And we've been so fortunate. Everybody has really embraced it. And I'm really thankful for that. The name came out of my head, really. I wanted a single word. I didn't want to be blah, 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 IT security or blah, 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 OT security or anything like that. There are so many organizations like that. And I also didn't want to make up a word that was like an anagram of a word you might have heard. You know, we know insurance companies who do that, bless them. You know, they just come up with a word that's almost like a word, but it's not quite. And actually, I've got to say, there's one or two energy providers who do the same thing, but hey, let's not get into that. So I wanted a real word that meant something, and you know, something we could really hang our hat on. And lithification is the process. In geology, lithification is a process where you turn sand and shale and pebbles and all sorts of bits and pieces into something solid, bedrock in the geological world. So if you were to think of lithification in those kind of terms and then apply that as a metaphor to security, if you think about all of the many myriad messages that we all hear on a daily basis, and must be absolutely mind-boggling for anybody who's an IT manager or a CISO on a site in OT, then how do we turn all of those various messages that are all waving around into something which is a really solid basis for them to go and do everything they do? We want them to have a really strong foundation on which to do all of their activities. And so that's the metaphor, really. It does mean something. It's about really being able to promote that solid foundation.
Fantastic. I love the name, actually. Like our company name, thatsecurity.company. I love that as well, but so many people hate it. When I've been at networking events and I've handed them my card and it's all spelt in elite, they look at it and go, what the fuck? So many times. Yeah, so I'll beep that out.
Do you know what? Your name is such a clever name. Actually, you look at it and then you kind of do a double take and then you go, oh no, actually, that's so clever, isn't it? And you can elicit that kind of a response simply from somebody looking at your business card. You're probably on the right tracks in security, because we've got to challenge, we've got to make people think. And I think even your company name really does that. So I really applaud you for yours as well. It's awesome.
Oh, I love it. I really do. Thank you. So last question, and possibly the most important one that we're going to have today. In terms of OT IT convergence, let's just talk about it. Yes or no? Are you for it? Are you against it? How would you go about it? All these different things. Let's just talk about that. I want to hear, I think what you've said today has been super interesting. So I just want to hear all your thoughts on it. Not all of them, because we'll be here for like a year, but you know, if you could consolidate your thoughts on IT OT convergence.
Obviously, you know, it's a hot topic at the moment and lots of people are talking about it. I know lots of organizations who've started a project to start thinking about convergence, and it's either fallen by the wayside or it's got to a stalemate because the OT guys are saying you don't understand a thing about what we do, and the IT guys are saying, well, we'll just patch everything, it will all be fine, and we need to move forward, and I need to see everything that you're doing. And sometimes it can get a little bit adversarial, and never the twain shall meet. It can be done. We have sites where convergence has been achieved incredibly successfully, and they are doing it, and it is brilliant. It is very hard because of the different priorities. But the one thing I would say is, if you've got your OT security and visibility sewn up first, it then makes everything else far easier down the tracks. There's got to be an understanding of why OT must have special protection and does have to have these special conditions. But once you've got that and you've got a following wind and a lot of cooperation, there's no reason why it can't be done. But I would say that proper zoning and segmentation that's incredibly thorough and incredibly well defined is absolutely key. Otherwise, potentially you're opening up those critical assets to any number of threats that you wouldn't want. So yes, it's totally achievable. It can be done. Is it right for every organization? Not necessarily, but there's no reason why people can't get to that position if they wish.
Genuinely, really, really enjoyed listening to you today. Super fascinating topic, and you are clearly a massive knowledge bank on this. So is there anything that you just want to add at all? If you want anyone to take away one thing from this podcast, what would it be?
I guess what I'd really like people to take away is the importance of OT security and the difference in OT security. OT security all of a sudden in the last 12 to 24 months has started to become a buzzword. And then everybody's starting to get it confused with IoT and maybe try and merge the two together. And that for me is quite scary because, yeah, okay, IoT is something different as well. And it's really serious and it really needs taken into consideration. But when we're talking critical national infrastructure, this really needs to be given top priority and really thought through thoroughly. So I guess the takeaway would be, you know, let's make sure that these things are done properly. Let's make sure that everything is segmented in the way that it should be. And let's really ensure that we enable really positive standpoints for the future. I know it's really, really easy to get really, really scared. And we've talked about that a little in this podcast. And yes, okay, it is a scary world, but in a way, so is walking down the street or driving your car. There's lots and lots of scary risks in the world. So knowing that we're dealing with risk, well, fine, okay. But actually, if we deal with OT security properly, there's no reason why that can't be a force for good and an enabler to both the business concerned and the nation. Because once you have that very, very strong foundation, then everything else is easier and more possible. It's easier to be more collaborative, to be more flexible, to be more entrepreneurial, to be able to embrace new ways of working. And really with that foundation, it can be done. So don't go worrying and lying awake at night, biting your fingernails. Let's think about this as something that is really, really achievable. And there's a lot that can be done, because for sure, there is so much positive out there.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for coming in and speaking to me today. I've had a great time. And
do you know what? So have I, and thank you so very much. I just love talking about this topic, as you can tell. We're super passionate about it, and we're happy to engage anytime, because we just love what we do. So thank you so much.
So thank you for joining the Purple Team podcast. A little bit longer than usual, but an absolutely great episode, I'm sure you'll agree. Thanks again to Liz Deakin of Lithify, and I'll catch you all next time.